The rain drummed softly on the old slate roof of Whitmore House as Eleanor watched the black car approach through the misted window. Her husband, James, stood beside her, his expression unreadable yet filled with determination. He had made his decision a week ago, and now, nothing could change it. "She's here," James said quietly, his tone heavy with meaning. Eleanor folded her arms, feeling the cold draft that seeped through the edges of the window. She had agreed, yes, but only because James insisted. The child they were about to welcome, Clara Evans, was the daughter of James's late best friend. The accident had been dreadful. A single moment of twisted metal on a rain-slicked road, and the girl was left without anyone. The car door opened. A small figure stepped out, her brown coat slightly too big, a woolen hat slipping down over her eyes. Clara looked up, hesitant but composed, clutching a worn teddy bear against her chest. James hurried out to meet her, his face softening in a way Eleanor had not seen in months. He knelt before the girl, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome home, Clara. You're safe now." Eleanor followed, her boots crunching on the gravel path. The words, home, and safe, lingered uneasily in her mind. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and freshly baked bread. Their daughter, Amelia, stood at the bottom of the staircase, her golden hair tied neatly with a ribbon. She was 10, the same age as Clara. Her eyes, usually bright and curious, now flickered with something Eleanor could not name, perhaps uncertainty, or a child's quiet jealousy. "Amelia, darling," Eleanor said softly. "This is Clara. She'll be staying with us for a while." "For a while," James interrupted, smiling at the two girls. "We'll see how things go." Clara looked around the hallway, the portraits, the antique mirror, the grand staircase, as if stepping into another world. Then, with a shy voice, she whispered, "It's beautiful." James beamed. "You'll have your own room upstairs, just next to Amelia's." Eleanor nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes. I've prepared it for you." That night, as the girls settled upstairs, Eleanor found herself alone in the drawing room. The fire crackled, throwing light across the shelves of old books. James entered quietly, his expression warm. "She's a good girl, you'll see," he said, pouring himself a drink. "She just needs love, and a bit of time." Eleanor stared into the flames. "I only hope Amelia doesn't feel replaced." James frowned slightly. "Don't start that, Ellie. We're doing the right thing." But as the wind howled outside and the clock ticked toward midnight, Eleanor couldn't shake the unease growing in her chest. Upstairs, a faint creak echoed through the corridor, then a whisper, soft and indistinct. She rose, holding her breath, listening. Two voices, one hesitant, one calm, drifted faintly through the darkness. Then silence. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She took a step toward the staircase, heart pounding, when a single sound made her freeze. A quiet, deliberate knock on Clara's bedroom door. The following morning, sunlight streamed faintly through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the breakfast table. Eleanor moved quietly between the counter and the stove, her mind replaying the strange whisper she'd heard the night before. When she entered the hall earlier, both girls had been fast asleep. Or at least, they had pretended to be. "Morning, Mum," Amelia said, her voice subdued as she spooned cereal into her bowl. Clara sat opposite her, hands folded neatly, watching every movement with curious calm. "Did you sleep well, Clara?" Eleanor asked gently. Clara smiled, a perfect, almost practiced smile. "Yes, thank you. Amelia showed me where everything is." Amelia didn't respond. She kept her gaze fixed on her milk, stirring it absent-mindedly. James entered the room moments later, still adjusting his tie, his energy bright and cheerful. "How are my girls this morning?" he said, kissing the top of Clara's head before Amelia's. It was a small gesture, but it pierced through Eleanor's heart like a needle. After breakfast, the girls went out into the garden. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke. Eleanor watched from the window as they walked toward the old oak tree near the edge of the property. For a moment, she thought they looked sweet together, two children finding friendship through shared loss. But then something changed. Amelia handed Clara a skipping rope. Clara took it, hesitated, and then began to jump, counting softly to herself. Amelia clapped along, smiling faintly. But when Clara stumbled, she turned abruptly and glared, her eyes flashing in a way Eleanor had never seen in a child before. Moments later, Amelia was crying. Clara stood perfectly still, her expression innocent as James came rushing out of the house. "What happened?" he demanded. "She pushed me," Amelia cried, rubbing her elbow. "I didn't." Clara's voice trembled just enough to sound convincing. "She said I cheated and she pushed me first." James turned to Eleanor, frowning. "You see what I mean? She's just a child trying to fit in." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak but stopped. Clara's gaze flicked toward her then, soft, calculating, almost cold. It lasted only a second before she looked down again, her shoulders shaking as if from tears. That evening, while setting the table for supper, Eleanor noticed something peculiar. The framed family photograph on the mantelpiece, taken last Christmas, had been moved. In its place now stood the same frame, but with a new photograph slipped inside. Clara was in the middle. James stood beside her, smiling warmly, while Amelia stood slightly behind, almost out of focus. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She called James into the room. "Did you change this picture?" He looked, frowning. "No." "Why?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure if she sounded foolish. "Because this wasn't here before." James shrugged. "Maybe one of the girls was playing with it." Later that night, Eleanor climbed the stairs quietly. The door to Clara's room was ajar, and faint light spilled across the hallway. She peered inside. Clara was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, whispering softly to someone, or something. On the pillow beside her sat the same worn teddy bear. Its fur was matted, one button eye missing. Clara's voice was calm, almost soothing. "She doesn't like me, Teddy," she whispered. "But Daddy does. Daddy said I belong here." Eleanor's hand tightened around the doorframe. And then, without looking up, Clara added softly, "She'll leave soon. You'll see." A week passed, and the quiet unease within Whitmore House deepened like fog rolling in from the moors. James appeared happier than he had in months, often taking Clara into town for small treats or little walks through the village green. Amelia, however, grew quieter each day. Eleanor noticed the change most clearly in the mornings. Her once lively daughter now lingered at the breakfast table, pushing her toast around the plate. When she spoke, her voice was soft, detached. "Are you excited for your birthday next week?" Eleanor asked one morning, forcing cheer into her tone. Amelia shrugged. "I suppose." Clara looked up immediately, eyes bright. "Can we have a party for her? I could help with decorations." James smiled approvingly. "That's a lovely idea. You're thoughtful, Clara." Eleanor watched as Amelia's shoulders sank. "We'll see," she murmured, unwilling to commit. That evening, Eleanor found Amelia sitting alone in her room, sketching quietly. On the paper, she had drawn two girls standing under a tree. One of them was faded, erased at the edges. "Sweetheart, what's that?" Eleanor asked. Amelia hesitated, then whispered, "It's me. But I'm not really there anymore." The words chilled Eleanor to the bone. The following Saturday, James came home carrying two beautifully wrapped boxes. "A little early," he said, grinning. "But why wait? One for each of my girls." Amelia smiled faintly as she tore open the wrapping. Inside was a simple puzzle set, the kind she had outgrown years ago. She looked up at her father, trying to hide her disappointment. Clara, meanwhile, opened her gift, a gleaming silver locket. Inside was a photograph of James and Clara together. Eleanor froze. "Oh, James," she said, keeping her tone steady. "That's thoughtful." Clara held it up proudly. "It's perfect. Now I'll always have Daddy close." James laughed softly. "Well, you're part of the family now, aren't you?" Amelia turned away, blinking back tears. Later that night, Eleanor confronted her husband in the study. "You're making it worse, James. Amelia feels invisible, and you can't see what's happening." James set down his glass with a sharp clink. "You're overreacting. Clara needs love. She's been through hell, Eleanor. Don't punish her for wanting a father's affection." "This isn't about affection," Eleanor replied quietly. "It's about balance. She's playing you." James frowned. "Playing me? She's a child." Eleanor opened her mouth to answer, but a sound from upstairs interrupted them, a faint thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming. They rushed up the stairs. Amelia's bedroom door stood open. Her sketchbook lay on the floor, pages torn, drawings ripped. Amelia sat on her bed, eyes wide with tears. "She took my pictures," she whispered. "She said Daddy only needs one daughter now." Eleanor's breath caught. "Where is she?" "In my room," Amelia said, trembling. "She's putting her things in my drawers." Eleanor strode to the adjoining room and pushed open the door. Clara was indeed there, rearranging the furniture, her clothes folded neatly in Amelia's wardrobe. "What are you doing?" Eleanor demanded. Clara turned slowly, the silver locket glinting in the lamplight. "Daddy said I could use it. He said I belong here." Eleanor stared at her. "That's not true." Clara smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You'll see." At that moment, James appeared behind Eleanor. "Ellie," he said softly, his tone weary, "maybe we should let her stay there for now. It's just a room." Eleanor turned to him in disbelief. "It's not just a room, James. It's Amelia's space, her place of safety." But James had already walked away. When Eleanor looked back at Clara, the girl was still standing in the center of the room, her expression calm and unreadable. And behind her, hanging on the wall, was a new drawing. Two figures, hand in hand. One small and smiling. The other, the mother, was crossed out in black ink. The late autumn light stretched long across the Whitmore garden, painting everything in gold and grey. Eleanor stood by the kitchen window, her hands still wet from washing the dishes, watching the two girls outside. Amelia sat on the swing, motionless, her small hands gripping the ropes tightly. Clara, meanwhile, was crouched by the flower beds, talking softly to herself, or perhaps, to something no one else could see. Eleanor stepped outside, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her. The air smelled of damp earth and dying leaves. "Clara, what are you doing, dear?" she asked gently. Clara turned her head, her pale face half hidden by her dark hair. "I'm talking to your roses, Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "They said they missed the man who used to take care of them." Eleanor froze. James had indeed planted those roses years ago, and only he tended to them. "Who told you that?" she whispered. Clara smiled, her lips curling ever so slightly. "They did. Roses never lie." That night, Eleanor woke to the faint creak of floorboards. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the wind outside. She slipped from bed, careful not to wake James, and followed the sound down the hall. At the end stood Amelia's door, slightly ajar. She peered inside and found Clara standing by Amelia's bed, whispering into her ear. "Clara!" Eleanor's voice broke the stillness. The girl turned slowly, her expression unreadable. She has nightmares, Clara said calmly. I'm helping her forget. Eleanor's eyes darted to Amelia, who slept restlessly, murmuring something under her breath. Go back to your room, Eleanor said firmly. Clara's eyes glimmered in the dim light. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, she replied softly, before gliding past her, silent as a shadow. The following morning, Amelia refused to eat breakfast. She stared blankly at her bowl of porridge, her eyes distant. Mummy, she whispered, Clara told me Daddy loves her more than me. The spoon slipped from Eleanor's hand. That's not true, darling, she said quickly, though her heart tightened painfully. Later that day, when James returned from work, Eleanor confronted him. You need to talk to her, she insisted. Something is wrong with Clara. Amelia's frightened, and I. Eleanor, James interrupted, setting down his briefcase. Clara is just a child. She's been through trauma. You mustn't imagine things. Eleanor stared at him, disbelief in her eyes. Imagine. She's getting into Amelia's head. And she talks to the roses as if they answer. James sighed and rubbed his temples. You're exhausted. Take a rest. I'll look after the girls. That evening, Eleanor sat by the window again, her mind a storm of confusion. In the garden below, Clara stood once more by the roses, whispering. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Amelia stood beside her, eyes wide, face pale, as if under a spell. And then Clara turned, her gaze rising straight to the window. She smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made Eleanor's blood run cold. A week later, the Whitmore house was filled with the scent of baking and the sound of faint laughter. Amelia's birthday was approaching, and Eleanor was determined to make it a day of joy, a day untouched by shadows. She had planned every detail, balloons, ribbons, the cake in the shape of a swan. For once, she wanted her daughter to smile again. But something in the air felt wrong. The house felt heavier, colder. Clara had been unusually quiet since the night Eleanor caught her in Amelia's room. She helped decorate the sitting room, her movements precise, her expression distant. When James returned from work, he lifted Clara in his arms with a smile that lasted a moment too long. How are my girls? He asked warmly. Eleanor's stomach tightened. My girls. That night, Eleanor overheard Clara and Amelia whispering in their shared room. Amelia's voice trembled. Clara, what if Mummy gets angry tomorrow? She won't, Clara said softly. I promised you, remember? Tomorrow will be perfect. You'll finally be free. Eleanor froze in the hallway. Free? From what? The next morning dawned grey. Rain tapped against the window panes as Eleanor arranged the table. Balloons sagged slightly in the damp air. Clara and Amelia appeared in matching dresses, white lace and blue ribbons. It should have been endearing, yet something about them made Eleanor's chest ache. During breakfast, Amelia barely spoke. Clara sat beside her, cutting Amelia's pancakes into small pieces, feeding her like a fragile doll. James found it sweet. Eleanor found it unsettling. After the small family lunch, James brought out the cake. Make a wish, darling, he said, smiling at Amelia. The little girl hesitated. Her eyes flicked towards Clara, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then Amelia closed her eyes. When she blew out the candles, all the lights in the house flickered. A soft wind brushed through the room though every window was closed. The candles lit themselves again. Amelia gasped. Clara clapped her hands and laughed, a laugh too old for her age. She made her wish, Clara said proudly. Now it will come true. James chuckled awkwardly, trying to lighten the moment. Must be the draft, he muttered. But Eleanor could not shake the chill crawling down her spine. That night, she found Amelia awake in bed, eyes wide and brimming with tears. Mummy, she whispered, Clara said my wish has a price. She said Daddy belongs to her now. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Amelia, darling, that's nonsense. Daddy loves you. No one can take him away. But even as she said it, she remembered the way James had looked at Clara earlier, protective, gentle, almost tender. Later, when Eleanor passed James's study, she paused. Inside, James sat at his desk, papers spread before him. Clara stood beside him, her small hand resting on his shoulder. He was smiling in a way Eleanor hadn't seen in months. And then Clara looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze through the crack in the door. Her eyes gleamed in the lamplight. Slowly, she lifted one finger to her lips. Sure. Eleanor stumbled back, heart pounding. Upstairs, the birthday candles had burned down to wax pools. One flame, however, refused to die. It flickered stubbornly on the cake, casting a faint shadow on the wall that looked like two figures holding hands. The following days passed in uneasy silence. The laughter that once filled the Whitmore house had turned into whispers and uneasy glances. Even the ticking of the old clock in the hallway seemed louder now, as though marking the rhythm of a house slowly falling apart. Eleanor spent her mornings watching the girls from the kitchen window. Clara always led Amelia by the hand, guiding her into the garden, whispering secrets into her ear. Sometimes Amelia laughed, sometimes she cried, but she always followed. One afternoon, when the rain refused to stop, Eleanor decided to tidy James's study. She dusted the shelves, arranged his papers, and tried to ignore the sense of dread that hung in the air. Then, as she opened the bottom drawer of his desk, she froze. Inside lay a small photograph, an old one, faded at the edges. It showed James standing beside a woman Eleanor did not recognize, holding a little girl who looked unmistakably like Clara. Her heart raced. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note, "To my darling James, thank you for keeping our little one safe." The ink was smudged, but the date was clear. 5 years ago. Eleanor's hands trembled. 5 years ago, James had told her he was away for work, months of travel and late-night calls. Could this be the truth behind it all? When James returned home that evening, Eleanor confronted him in the hallway. "Who is she?" she demanded, holding up the photograph. His face drained of color. "Where did you find that?" "In your drawer." "Answer me, James. Who is this woman, and why does Clara look exactly like the child in this picture?" James ran a hand through his hair, unable to meet her gaze. "It's not what you think, Eleanor. Please, just listen." "Not what I think." Eleanor's voice cracked. "You adopted her, James. You brought that girl into our home, into Amelia's life. Was it out of pity, or guilt?" "She needed help," James said finally, voice low. "And I owed it to her mother." "Owed?" Eleanor's heart pounded. "For what?" Before he could answer, a small voice came from the stairs. "You promised you wouldn't tell." Both turned to see Clara standing halfway up, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears. "You promised me, Daddy." Eleanor felt as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. "Daddy." James took a step toward Clara. "Clara, please." But the girl backed away, shaking her head. "You said I could stay forever. You said you loved me more than her." She pointed a trembling finger toward Amelia's room. "You said she was weak. That I was special." "Clara, stop." James pleaded, but it was too late. Amelia had come to the doorway, small and silent, her eyes wide with hurt. "Is it true?" she whispered. "You love her more than me?" "Amelia, no, of course not," James began, but the words tangled in his throat. Clara turned to Eleanor, her voice steady now. "You never wanted me here." "But Daddy did. He said I belonged." Eleanor's vision blurred. "You don't understand what you've done to her," she said, her voice trembling. She's just a child, my child. Clara's expression darkened. And what about me? He promised I was his too. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. A gust of wind swept through the hall though every window was shut. The photograph in Eleanor's hand tore itself free and drifted to the floor. Clara stared at it, her lips curling into a small, sad smile. Mummy used to say that love can make people do terrible things, she whispered. She was right. The lights went out completely. Eleanor's scream echoed through the house. The storm outside raged through the night. Wind rattled the shutters while the rain lashed against the windows like an angry hand. Eleanor sat awake in the living room, still trembling, the photograph lying on the table before her. James had gone after Clara, but neither had returned. Hours passed. The grandfather clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. Still no sound of them. Finally, Eleanor could bear it no longer. She lit a candle and climbed the stairs. The house groaned beneath her feet as though resenting every step. She stopped outside Amelia's room, empty. The bed was cold, untouched. Panic surged through her. Amelia, she called softly, but the only reply was the wind whistling through the chimney. Then she noticed something strange, a faint line along the far wall of the hallway, as if the wallpaper had been peeled and then replaced. Her hands shook as she touched it. Beneath the paper, she found a narrow seam. A hidden door. She pressed her ear to it. Faint whispers leaked through, one calm and low, the other trembling. Clara and Amelia. Eleanor pushed. The panel gave way with a slow creak, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by the flickering flame of a candle. At the end of the passage sat Clara on the floor, holding Amelia's hand. James stood behind them, pale and broken, like a man trapped between guilt and despair. Eleanor, he said hoarsely. Please, don't be angry. I tried to tell you. What is this? Eleanor whispered. What have you done? James took a deep breath. This used to be my mother's prayer room. I found it when we moved in. I let Clara come here when she was frightened. She said she could talk to her mother here. Clara turned slowly, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. She listens to me, Mrs. Whitmore. She said Daddy would take care of me, like he promised. Eleanor shook her head. Your mother is gone, Clara. Clara smiled faintly. No. She's here. She says you're in the way. Suddenly, the candle flickered violently. The walls seemed to hum, vibrating with a low, haunting sound. The air turned cold enough for Eleanor to see her breath. James, she whispered, get Amelia out of here. But James stood frozen, staring at the old mirror fixed to the far wall. In its glass, a woman's reflection appeared, a pale face, eyes hollow yet alive. She looked nothing like Eleanor. Her hand rested gently on Clara's shoulder. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. She's here. The mirror trembled. Cracks began to spread across its surface. Eleanor grabbed Amelia and pulled her close. Clara, stop this, she cried. You have to let her go. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She said she can stay if I make room. The glass shattered. A violent wind tore through the room, extinguishing the candle. In the brief flash of lightning from the window, Eleanor saw the shadow of a woman standing behind Clara, tall, still, and watching. When the thunder rolled, the figure vanished. Clara collapsed to the floor, sobbing. James rushed to her side, shouting her name, but she did not respond. The room smelled faintly of smoke and salt, as though the sea itself had been summoned into the walls. Eleanor held Amelia tightly, whispering into her ear. It's over, darling. It's over. But as the storm quieted and the dawn began to rise, a faint voice drifted from the shattered mirror. Not yet. Morning broke with a pale light that struggled through the heavy clouds. Eleanor sat on the staircase, still holding Amelia tightly. James and Clara were silent, their faces pale and drained from the night's ordeal. The hidden door had been closed and the mirror shattered, but something in the house felt different, charged with a quiet, lingering presence. Eleanor stood, determination rising within her. She needed answers, and the old house would finally give them. She led James and Clara to the library, where rows of dusty books lined the walls. Among them, she found a small leather-bound journal with a brass clasp, worn and faded. Opening it, she realized it belonged to the woman in the mirror, James's mother. The handwriting was elegant but sharp, a record of secrets kept for decades. She wrote about this house, James murmured, peering over her shoulder. About me, about Clara, about my mistakes. Eleanor read aloud. The journal spoke of grief, love, and regret. It spoke of a child lost too soon and a mother desperate to guide the living from beyond. The final entry chilled them all. The living must remember the past, or it will repeat. Protect the innocent, but do not fear the truth. She will show them when they are ready. Clara tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. Is she gone? Eleanor looked into the empty space where the mirror had been. I think she's at peace now, Clara. But she left a part of herself here, a warning, a guide. James nodded slowly. I understand now. I have to be honest, with all of you, and myself. No more secrets. The tension that had gripped the house for so long seemed to lift. Sunlight began to filter through the tall windows, warming the wooden floor. Eleanor felt a sense of relief she hadn't known she could feel. Yet as they left the library, Amelia paused at the doorway and whispered softly. I can hear her sometimes, Mrs. Whitmore. She's not far. Eleanor smiled gently, her heart heavy but calm. Then we'll listen, together. And we'll make sure the past stays where it belongs, behind us, guiding, but not controlling. The storm had passed. The house, once filled with whispers and shadows, now held a quiet promise, that even in the darkest of places, light could find its way through. As the three of them stepped into the garden, the first blooms of spring seemed to awaken, brushing the estate in soft colors. The past was not erased, but its power had been transformed into wisdom, and for the first time, the Whitmore family felt whole again.